Welcome to our presentation on the historical lens for the short story The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster. The Machine Stops was written in 1909 by British writer E.M. Forster. The story was written during the Second Industrial Revolution, which saw many technological advancements which will be discussed in a few slides. The Machine Stops is essentially a dystopian future where human contact is scarce, people rarely travel, and everyone lives in a room where a machine will do their tasks. The story follows the two main characters, Vashti and Kuno. Vashti, who worships the machine in which they live, and Kuno, who dislikes the isolated world of the machine. Major events take place throughout the story, as well as the foreshadowing of many technological devices. The purpose of the text is to show people why it is a bad thing to rely too much on technology. We hope you enjoy our presentation. What historical events or movements might have influenced this writer? Here is some background information about E.M. Forster before I go into depth about what may have influenced him to write The Machine Stops. Forster lived a total of 91 years, ranging from 1879 to 1970. The Machine Stops surprisingly was his only science fiction story. He was known for writing stories about the different wealth classes in British society. I believe many different historical events and movements influenced Mr. Forster to write The Machine Stops. The first event I want to discuss are the Industrial Revolutions. Forster most likely saw that as time was going on, technology was improving significantly. The Industrial Revolutions changed the world in a major way. The first Industrial Revolution saw a rapid growth of machines, chemical manufacturing, use of steam power, water power, and the development of machine tools. The Second Industrial Revolution, which is more commonly known as the Technological Revolution, took place around the time The Machine Stops was written. It saw new technological systems such as railroad networks, telegraphs, sewage systems, gas and water supply, and electrical systems, as well as new technological devices such as the telephone. Since there were more complex systems and devices during the Second Industrial Revolution compared to the first, it was most likely proof to Forster that technology was advancing at an astronomical rate. He built on to many of these inventions in the story. There are also many different social movements that most likely influenced Forster. Firstly, the women's movement was a major historical event. The movement was essential to promote equality. This relates to The Machine Stops because in the story, women and men are treated equally. This is shown by Vashti being able to give a lecture on Australian music. There were not many female teachers when the story was released, which proves the women's movement influenced him to believe equality would happen in the future, which has certainly happened. Also, communism definitely influenced Forster. Communism is a system in which goods are owned in common and are available to all as needed. So essentially this means that all people are treated equally, have the same opportunities, and get paid the same. This relates to the story, because in the story, everyone lives in a world where they all have access to the same materials, live in the same type of room, and the whole world is the same everywhere. Those are a few events and movements that most likely influenced Forster. Now I'll compare those events and movements to quotes I found in the story. Here's the first quote I found. This quote strongly relates to the Second Industrial Revolution with respect to the invention of the telephone. The quote mentions Vashti not being able to see Kuno's expression through the machine. This is very similar to the telephone because the telephone allows you to hear voices but prevents you from seeing emotions and expression. The device they use is essentially a FaceTime call in which the machine blocks expression, which this telephone similarly does because you cannot see the person you are talking to. Here's my next quote. I believe this quote relates to the events in which the invention of the steam engine and factories took place. This is because the quote reminds me a lot about pollution. Forster must have seen how many of these new inventions would release emissions into the air, which were not pleasant to breathe in. This quote obviously involves the most serious case of pollution, but is something to fear if we don't stop releasing emissions into the air. Here's another quote I found. This quote strongly relates to the First Industrial Revolution and the machine tools that were invented. These tools relate to this paragraph because the paragraph essentially talks about how Vashti was very reliant on the buttons and switches that controlled everything in her room. Machine tools have been made to make tasks such as manufacturing easier without a human's help. Forster was most likely trying to depict that these tools will not only be used for companies' machines, but as well as simple tasks such as turning on a radio. He most likely was also trying to say that humans will become too reliant on the advancements of technology. Here's the next quote. This quote strongly relates to the invention of the car. In 1909, there were only 10,600 cars in the world because they were a new invention. Cars were considered to many as a despicable symbol of arrogance and power. This makes it very surprising to me that Forster foreshadowed that the car would become the staple for transportation in the future. The car was one of the most frowned upon inventions during the events of the Second Industrial Revolution, and many didn't see it breaking through that time frame. But unlike many, Forster knew that human beings would move on from the horse and buggy to the car. Here is my final quote. This quote strongly relates to many different inventions during the First Industrial Revolution. This is because during the First Industrial Revolution, people started becoming too reliant on different tools. This also connects to today's world. People today are so reliant on their phones that they always need it in their hand or pocket, and they rely on it almost as much as the air in which we breathe. Forster could tell that the new inventions that could perform tasks easier were almost as important to people as breathing. It was the same thing for the characters in the machine stops. They relied on the machine doing their tasks, and the constant hum was there to ensure to them that the machine was still working.
How important is the historical context, the works, and the readers to interpreting the work? A significant part of life and literature is historical context, and without it, memories, plots, and characters have little meaning. Historical context deals with information that surrounds an event. The historical context applies in more technical words to the social, religious, economic, and political circumstances that occurred within a certain era and location. The Second Industrial Revolution, additionally referred to as the Technological Revolution, was a phase of rapid standardization and industrialization, and was generally recognized as the period between 1870 and 1914, which was the time the Machine Stops was published. The Second Industrial Revolution was a time when a number of changes that transformed society were triggered by advancements in steel manufacturing, electricity, and petroleum. Railroads have increased with the manufacture of cost-effective steel, and more industrial machinery have been developed. The diagrams shown on the slide are specific examples that led to the Second Industrial Revolution. Some of the examples were railways, engines and turbines, the automobile, and maritime technology. It has shown that the Second Industrial Revolution was a big event in the time the book was published. As we know, Forster had a lot to say about technology itself. Quote 1. I want to see you not through the machine, said Kuno. I want to speak to you through the wearisome machine. I believe this quote can be interpreted or understood in different ways when considered from a perspective of a modern reader versus a person reading the story in 1909. A 1909 reader would interpret this quote like any other quote, as it's straightforward and authentic. A modern reader would interpret this quote differently because modern readers are witnessing a big pandemic in the world which is called COVID. Because of this pandemic, modern readers are not allowed to engage with friends and families, so they have to communicate using online apps like FaceTime and Skype. Communication through a screen is totally different from communicating in person because you don't get to feel that bond you have with a person. Also, face to face, having a conversation is way more real than having one online, seeing the person on a device. It's totally different. Quote 2. Vashti was seized with the terrors of direct experience. She shrank back into the room and the wall closed up again. Direct experience is the process of acquiring knowledge by fully and directly participating in an activity. Vashti was not about direct experience and liked to do her own thing. A modern reader could relate to this quote because of jobs. People that had to work was forced to change their setting as they had to work from home and was losing that direct experience. For example, hands-on jobs were affected the most in the pandemic as the whole job is usually direct experience. Some examples of direct experience would be physical, emotions, responsibility, social, thought, and sensory. Quote 3. The room, though it contained nothing, was in touch with all that she cared for in the world. Vashti has not left her room in decades. Much like today's world, she has access to communication with others, art, literature, entertainment, and necessities of life without needing to venture out. This quote shows that the creation and introduction of electricity affects people's ability to socialize, as electricity can give you the power to cook food, watch TV, and talk on the phone without leaving your house. During these rough times, people are seeing increases in job hours because of this big pandemic, so they are losing opportunity to see people and socialize. Quote 4. Few traveled in these days, for, thanks to the advance of science, the earth was exactly alike all over. Rapid intercourse, from which the previous civilization had hoped so much, had ended by defeating itself. Forster was really interested in what public and quick transportation would do to the society. Transportation is a big thing in today's world as there are many different ways to get places, for example, car, bus, train. Forster worried about people becoming inactive and out of shape because technology was making it easier for people to get around. Nowadays, modern people are on screens the whole day. This is a big issue because people are becoming inactive and out of shape since gyms are closed because of COVID. Quote 5. You talk as if God had made the machine, cried the other. I believe that you pray to it when you are unhappy. I believe this quote could relate to a modern reader. As the coronavirus pandemic continues to cause deaths and distribute billions of lives globally, people may turn to religious groups, families, friends, co-workers, or other social networks for support. This pandemic is so serious as the death numbers go up by day. The diagram on the slide has shown that more people have become more religious since the pandemic started.
Does the story reveal or contradict the prevailing values of the time in which it was written? To begin this analysis, it is necessary to consider what was occurring in terms of general development and how the life of the mainstream society changed over the early 20th century around the time the story was written in order to understand how the story could have revealed or contradicted prevailing values, standards, and norms. This will be covered when analyzing each quote. Work in the 1900s held value among society, and although the rise of technology in that time was welcomed, it contributed in helping humans with certain tedious tasks that were completed with the help of a machine much more efficiently. Most basic skills, such as preparing food or physically fixing things around people's homes, was done alone, by hand. The first quote is from the part where Vashti is on the airship and encounters a sunlight from a broken blind, which disturbs her, leading to an anxious attendant claiming she cannot fix the blind. This just shows how unequipped humans are in the story. They have prolonged dependence on the machine and the mending apparatus to fix any problems for them and to essentially run society. Because of this, there is initially no need for humans to know how to physically do anything besides staying in their isolated rooms and get anything served to them with the click of a button. Similarly, the second quote, which also takes place in the airship, proves that the machine has stripped humans of their natural behavior to the point where Vashti gets anxious of the idea of expressing her needs to another person. Both quotes are contradictory to what human life was like in the 1900s. Both quotes involve similar meaning. The first quote suggests that meeting with others in person, even for a lecture that Vashti was originally giving through the machine, is completely unnecessary to the people in the story. They have been raised in a society that fully revolves around the machine, where it provides them with everything they need, including a source for verbal communication. The second quote shows the effects of such a way of life and the mentality that the majority of society shares, with humans becoming adapted to life under the machine. Society in the 1900s was much different in terms of social sense. Work was done together with others, most notably in a factory setting, which became more popular during the Second Industrial Revolution. This was the case with almost everyone, including young children who would work in factories as well. This quote shows how attached the humans have become to the machine. Their whole life revolves around it. The centuries of technological development in the story had led to the creation of the machine, which caused the life that the humans live in the story, where they are at constant rest in their individual rooms and having the luxury of being able to receive anything they need with the click of a button. The 1900s saw an increasing amount of modern living among wealthy entrepreneurs in the middle class. In this era of industrialization, society saw more of an indulgence in manufactured items and goods, which moved them closer to an overindulgent society which is consumed by their own creations. This idea of decadence is what Forster pictured when considering how society's values were changing with the developments that took place during the Second Industrial Revolution. This quote shows how the quote-unquote naked man, who has essentially achieved nothing in the end, had done irreversible harm to himself as a result of what he had created. Forrester paints a picture of what society has turned out to be like with centuries worth of effort into creating such technology as the machine in the story. During the Second Industrial Revolution, new technological ideas were looked upon as a way to help improve the way of life as opposed to lead to the fate of humanity. Forster also portrays an idea of extreme dependency of a human being on technology, almost as though it is a necessary thing to the human, such as a garment of clothing. This ultimately reveals Forrester's fear of what damage technology is capable of causing when developed to such high standards. The 1900s brought lots of thought, research, and experimentation into different fields of science in order to develop innovative technology that would help improve the quality of life. Forster's opinion on the power and even dangers of technology is justified by this. Nonetheless, it is truly extraordinary how E.M. Forster was able to closely predict such a reality over a century later worth of technological and scientific advancements, especially when given circumstances in his time, when predicting such a far-fetched outcome wouldn't be highly likely. It is shocking that today's society is stuck at home and separated from other friends and family, while being surrounded and even consumed by technology and social media, resembling certain aspects of the story. Forster had a clear envisionment of the potential dangers of technology and analyzed an era with rapid changes and developments, with humans relying more and more on mechanics and innovative tools to make day-to-day tasks easier for them.
I decided to answer the question, how accurately does the story depict the time in which it is set? I was interested in this question because I believe that this story, in a sense, perfectly describes the time we live in right now. E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops takes place in an advanced society where humans have lost the ability to survive on the Earth's surface. All of humanity relies on technology, the machine, to supply human needs, and everything takes place within the click of a button. Most humans are kept underground to generate ideas for the machine, and they will share these ideas through the speaking apparatus, which is similar to video chatting. E.M. Forster published this book in November 1909, and although this was written more than 100 years ago, it still has so many similarities to today's world. Nowadays, technology has evolved to the point where we can't live without it. Although it makes our life much easier in many ways, there are negative aspects of it too. In Forster's work, he perfectly depicts this and warns us of these negative aspects. As I said before, the futuristic world portrayed in The Machine Stops is an eerily familiar one. The characters clearly resemble similar but exaggerated versions of us. The reason this story depicts the time it's set in so well is that the author predicted technology in the days before the radio was even a thing. Back in 1909, when the story was published, it would have all seemed so far-fetched. People weren't even used to telephones, and Forster was anticipating things like Skype, FaceTime, our over-reliance on technology, and even COVID-19 lockdowns. He predicted with astonishing accuracy the effect that technology has on our relations with one another, with our bodies, and with our philosophy and culture, and that is the reason he depicts the time it's set in so accurately. Quote 1. There were buttons and switches everywhere. Buttons to call for food, for music, for clothing. There was the hot bath button, by pressure of which a basin of imitation marble rose out of the floor, filled to the brim with a warm deodorized liquid. There was the cold bath button. There was the button that produced literature. And there were, of course, the buttons by which she communicated with her friends. This quote represents Forster's predictions on the over-reliance of technology. Although this is an exaggeration of what we have in today's world, it's not that far off, and it's possible that this can happen in the future. We already have switches for hot and cold baths, and buttons to summon music and literature on our computers. This quote shows how Forster perfectly depicts what it would be like in a futuristic society, and makes it even more impressive that he wrote this 100 years ago. Quote 2. It has robbed us of the sense of space and the sense of touch. It has blurred every human relation and narrowed down love to a carnal act. It has paralyzed our bodies and our wills. This quote talks about the effects and negative impacts of the machine/technology. During the Second Industrial Revolution, when the story was written, many people had deep worries and concerns about the state of technology. This quote shows that Forster was one of the people who thought that technology could be dangerous to society, and it turns out he wasn't entirely wrong. Many people in today's world spend hours a day on their phones and tablets, locked in their rooms alone, robbing people of their outside world, their sense of space, and touch, like the characters in the stories. Once again, Forster astonishingly predicts this, and it shows how accurate he depicts the time and setting. Quote 3. When Vashti swerved away from the sunbeams with a cry, she, the flight attendant, behaved barbarically. She put out her hand to steady her. "How dare you?" exclaimed the passenger. "You forget yourself." The woman was confused and apologized for not having let her fall. People never touched one another. The custom had become obsolete, owing to the machine. This quote represents Forster's predictions on fewer in-person interactions in the future. In the story, humanity lived an underground life of individual self-isolation, and touching other people was incredibly frowned upon. Somehow, Forster once again managed to predict what's happening in the world right now. With COVID-19, we, like the characters in The Machine Stops, have had to live alone, in lockdown, and surrounded by technology. It would be a rare sight to see two strangers talking and touching one another in public, and again, this is proof of the accuracy of the depictions of the setting and time. Quote 4. Her voice was irritable, for she had been interrupted often since the music began. She knew several thousand people. In certain directions, human intercourse had advanced enormously. This quote represents Forster's predictions on social media and the internet. In today's age, almost everyone, like Vashti, knows hundreds and thousands of people, even though they haven't met in real life. This is mainly because of apps like Instagram, Snapchat, Discord, and Facebook, where you can message, call, and talk to random people online. The fact that Forster predicted this to be possible back in 1909, when the telephone wasn't even in wide use around the country, is almost unfathomable, and again, proves the accuracy of the depiction of the time it was set. Quote 5. You talk as if a god had made the machine, cried the other. I believe that you pray to it when you're unhappy. Men made it. Do not forget that. Great men, but men. The machine is much, but not everything. This quote, once again, represents Forster speaking on how he believes technology isn't everything, and his worries for the future of society. As I said before, the Industrial Revolution was a very interesting time period when it comes to innovations and technologies. Many new things were invented, such as the telephone, typewriter, air brakes, and more. Because of this, many worried that technology would one day go too far, and I believe this is what gave Forster motivation to write this quote, and the book in general. He predicted that one day, technology would be everywhere, and would almost rule humans as it did in his book. Once again, although his story was exaggerated, it's not far off what we're experiencing right now. If all technology was taken away from us at this very moment, many of us would fall, struggle, and not know how to live life, just as it happened in his story. Overall, Forster did an excellent job in depicting the time and setting in his book, and I know this because of how similar our world is to his. In conclusion, E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops was an incredibly interesting read. It has an uncanny resemblance to the world we find ourselves living in, especially in the era of COVID-19 and lockdowns. Humanity is on a path that could go two ways, and Forster's work can teach a thing or two about the route we choose. While technology can help us build a better world, we must not let it become the only world. Let's choose nature and physical interaction, and a world where technology is an enabler and not a controller. Thanks for watching.